I have news for you. Your world is not as it seems. Everything you know to be true is a lie. Hidden behind the facade of our everyday lives is a secret organization, a cabal with a dangerous agenda to manipulate the minds of the masses and usher in a new world order. We are living in crazy times, and we are seeing a manipulation which I feel must be addressed. In this episode, we are going to look at an aspect of the prison planet that will stray a little from the usual episodes. We'll return there in the next video. But there are times, like now, when there are serious issues for us to deal with, and those of us who just want the truth feel we must speak out and protest the lies that are being presented to us as truth. We are amid an onslaught of propaganda from the various sources of government lackeys, cloaked in the mantle of media outlets, when in fact they are corrupt corporations, curating the news on behalf of the establishment and three-letter intelligence agencies. I find that personally amusing to use CIA and MI6 with intelligence in the same sentence, though they are by no means stupid. Sinister, menacing, or ominous might be better descriptions. They are stupid in the sense that they are working against the people who fund them, the US and UK citizens, and are in collusion with the entities I have already mentioned, the cabal, probably without even knowing it. They are stupid in that they are working against their own interests also. I am talking about the rank and file members of these agencies. Now, I've called this episode When Victor Meldrew is Your Hero. Now, unless you grew up in the UK in the 90s, it's unlikely you'll know who this character is. So for you, gather round for a tale that will tickle your fancy and leave you more than a little amused.
What in the name of bloody hell? I do not believe. In the name of sanity, I do. That's it. That's just about the absolute limit of all bloody time. I mean, what was it? Hello! Yes, I'd like to speak to the manager, please, and be quick about it. Meldrew? No, he doesn't, but he will shortly. Hello! Is that Mr. P.T. Sturgeon? Yes, well, it's about a large yucca plant your garden centre delivered to my house this morning. Yes, a young chap, I didn't catch his name. It may have been Frank Spencer. Well, I'll tell you exactly what the problem is, Mr. Sturgeon. I was out the back working in the garden when he arrived, so I asked him if, for the time being, he'd put it in the downstairs toilet for me. And you know what he's done? He's only planted it in the Yes, actually in the lavatory pan. With compost and everything. I mean, how anyone could be so utterly goofy just boggles the mind. A mistake anyone could have made. And you stark stick. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Cock my leg against the trunk like a Yorkshire Terrier? No, I would not. I'll do it myself, thank you very much. And in future, I suggest you try and hire some people with a bit of common sense between their ears.
Imagine a world where grumbling is an art form and complaining is a way of life. Sounds familiar? Welcome to the quirky universe of One Foot in the Grave, a British sitcom that takes the everyday woes of life and turns them into comedic gold. At the centre of this uproarious storm is none other than Victor Meldrew, my hero, the grumpiest of grumpy old men, a curmudgeon of epic proportions. Picture this: Victor, a retiree who has mastered the art of finding fault in the most mundane of things, from malfunctioning toasters to perplexing neighbours. He's the kind of chap who could make a saint lose their patience. Victor's adventures, or misadventures, depending on how you look at it, are the heart and soul of the show. His world is populated by a cast of characters as quirky and exasperating as he is, making every episode a riotous roller coaster of mishaps and misunderstandings. Through it all, Victor's unyielding grumbles and deadpan delivery have you chuckling, even when you probably shouldn't. So if you're ready to embark on a hilariously grumpy journey with Victor Meldrew, where everyday life is a comedy of errors, well, One Foot in the Grave is your crash course in the fine art of complaining. But if you don't have that opportunity, and I'm guessing you probably don't, then I'm afraid this channel is your best alternative, minus the hilarity. Meldrew is the man who honed my grumpy skills and taught me how to push the buttons of the establishment. So get ready to groan and maybe even sympathize a little with a man who has learned from the best of the best how to kick the establishment in the nuts. I'm the Grumpy Grandpa.
Welcome to the Grumpy Grandpa channel, where grumbling is a way of life.
One of the things in this modern world of ours guaranteed to slide me into my Victor Meldrew mode is the mainstream media. I never tire of grumbling and complaining about that despicable industry, especially these days, where we have 24-hour news, where the sound bites never end, and the media's warmongering never stops. And you ask yourself, what is the role of the media in the vicious wars like Iraq and Afghanistan and now the Ukraine? Why do so many journalists beat the drums of war regardless of the lies of governments? And how are the crimes of war reported and justified? Now, Edward Bernays, author of this book, was a pioneer of contemporary propaganda. Public relations is a term that Bernays himself created. In his words,
"The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power of our country."
Bernays lived from 1891 to 1995 and was a pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the famous psychoanalyst, which greatly influenced his understanding of human psychology. Bernays harnessed the principles of psychology to manipulate public opinion and behavior, making him a significant figure in the 20th century communications landscape. Bernays revolutionized the way products were sold and political ideas were disseminated. He understood that people's decisions and actions are often driven by unconscious desires and emotions. By tapping into these underlying motivations, he crafted persuasive messages that appeal to people's subconscious minds. Bernays worked closely with powerful corporations and political figures, orchestrating campaigns that not only influenced public opinion, but also shaped the course of history. His techniques were deeply ingrained in the fabric of modern advertising, political campaigns, and public relations strategies. Bernays' legacy is a complex one, provoking discussions about the ethical boundaries of persuasion and the power of the media in shaping society. He was a member of the US Committee on Public Information, a covert organization formed in 1917 to convince Americans who were on the fence about fighting in Europe. Bernays, along with Walter Lippmann, went to President Woodrow Wilson and basically said to him, look, if you're going to join this conflict, we're going to need to sell this war to the American people. And so convinced, Woodrow Wilson establishes and builds the first modern propaganda machine. The idea is that the best approach to persuade people is to grasp them by their emotions, by their subliminal urges, and by their instincts. And this turned out to be sheer genius on Benet's part. Let's not waste time in reiterating the facts. Let's scare the hell out of everyone. So you get an image of the Statue of Liberty in ruins, crashing into New York Harbor with German aircraft hovering overhead. A depiction of the planet being devoured by a gorilla wearing a German helmet, its hands covered in blood. So facts are no longer relevant. The details are irrelevant. Public relations, in Edward Bernet's opinion, amounted to a war on people's minds, an effort to break their will. Walter Lippmann termed it manufacturing consent. One can almost hear Victor Meldrew.
What in the name of bloody hell?
Yeah, exactly. This is our media today, though infinitely more sophisticated. For those who are awake and aware, the lies are obvious, and we are left more in a state of astonishment that they get away with it than outrage, though that does come at a later stage. We can't understand how the moocows are taken in and brainwashed, but they are, and that's scary. But we've all been there too. We were all in this programmed state of mind at one time. So if we see it from their perspective, remembering our own brainwashing, then we can understand. They need information, as we did, truthful information. Knowledge is the key. We are all prisoners here on this planet, and it is the task of the awake to awaken those still asleep. Since Edward Bernays, the marketing of war and the fabrication of illusions has advanced significantly. And now, to emphasize this manipulation by the deep state, I'm going to use the news media, deployed as a propaganda machine, as a backdrop, and how it was essential to selling the Iraq invasion. Pointing out methods used often is the best way to wake up the bewildered herd, another of Walter Lippmann's phrases. The Pentagon, which invests roughly $1 billion annually in propaganda, recruiting and advertising in order to sell war. This is a branch of the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned of.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
In order to slant the news, the Pentagon has contracts with press companies. Pentagon officials are involved in press releases that are distributed to the media and use intelligence to sway public opinion, which is against the organization's mandate, by the way. Then there are the retired generals who act as press spokespersons for all the networks, while keeping their affiliation with certain military-industrial companies a secret. The co-opting and spinning of media that is thought to be the freest in the world is crucial to this campaign of theirs. Now, despite my cognitive decline, I remember very well the Iraq invasion and how the media covered it. Those were the days when I was as asleep as anyone else and bought into the propaganda. But today, in retrospect, I can see the techniques used by the media. From the beginning, journalists had a responsibility to ask challenging, incisive and confrontational questions, instead of going blindly to a briefing, having official speech and printing that speech verbatim the next day in the newspaper, acting as more of a stenographer rather than reporting facts. Zero resistance, zero inquiries. And the same pattern is being repeated today. I personally believe that a compelling case can be made that we might not have entered the war if the so-called journalists had done their job. These two individuals persuaded the world to attack Iraq, President George W. Bush and Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister. The military strategy known as shock and awe, intended to immobilize the nation, damage food production, the water supply and other civilian infrastructure, served as the invasion's blueprint.
I do not believe!
Exactly, Victor. It would have a similar impact to launching an atomic bomb on Japan. People were being terrorized on a large scale, and it would be covered up with a great deal of duplicity. But at the time, it wasn't reported in this way. Numerous American journalists joined the military troops in Kuwait as part of the Pentagon's media-friendly push to make any war with Iraq popular with the public. They were called embedded journalists. Most of the stories that viewers saw came from a system in which the media outlets complied with guidelines established by the Pentagon in the US and the Ministry of Defense in the UK. There were about 700 reporters infiltrated throughout our military at that time. And this stripped away the freedom of the press. Comply or you're excluded. Journalism was compromised. Have things changed today? Not one bit. They are still vessels of the deep state, if not more so. Echo chambers of the mainstream narrative. If you don't think the mainstream media is scripted, then listen to this.
Who are you really shopping for this holiday season? It's okay, you can admit it, if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay, you can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it. You've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it, Todd. If you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10.
That clip actually went on and creepy. And they're all doing it. It doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. Those around you will be pointing to the opposite side, yelling, "Fake news! Propaganda merchants!" And they'd probably be both correct. Too many journalists have been embedded or in bed with the administration on a variety of issues. Right now, it's covering up for creepy Joe Biden and his corrupt family. Aren't you fed up with all of this? Are you becoming weary of the lies and propaganda? With the media in bed with the deep state? Yeah, the deep state. That part of the government which is unelected and which remains in place when administrations change. Presidents come and go, but the deep state remains, continuing the corruption and control behind the scenes, with the lying media at its side. It's been estimated by some journalists that between 80 and 90% of what you read in the newspaper is officially inspired. More than once the CIA has been caught in bed with a prostituted news media. Operation Mockingbird comes to mind. Mockingbird was a secret campaign conducted by the CIA during the Cold War era. The operation aimed to manipulate and control the narrative presented in the media, both domestically and internationally, to influence public opinion and advance the CIA's objectives. The operation primarily targeted news organizations and journalists, attempting to influence their reporting and promote views that aligned with the US government's interests. The operation began in the early 1950s and continued for several decades. Its activities, including paying journalists and media organizations to publish CIA propaganda, shaping news stories, suppressing information that was detrimental to the government's agenda, and sometimes even directly intervening in the editorial process of news outlets. The operation was highly secretive, and its existence was officially acknowledged only years later. The revelations about Mockingbird raised legitimate concerns about the independence and integrity of the media, highlighting the ethical and moral implications of government interference in the free press. We are seeing this today with government intervention in social media. All this has come out in the open. When elites don't want the people to know what they're doing, they start up the propaganda machine, first implemented by Bernays, and subsequently upgraded and improved by successive propaganda agents. The elites are aware that it will be harder for them to pursue actions that may be in violation of human rights or involve aiding a repressive government, the more information the public has. The government often engages in public relations efforts anytime it decides to use military force overseas to persuade the public that they are operating with the greatest of intentions, when in actual fact they are pursuing their pernicious agenda, when they typically act in cold, calculated manner to serve the interests of the elite, the cabal. Therefore the public, that's you and me, pose a threat that must be mitigated. We need journalists who are brave enough to defy those who seek our collusion in selling their latest gory adventures in someone else's country. This means that you should never accept the official narrative, regardless of how patriotic it might seem, or how seductive and cunning it may be presented to us. Propaganda depends on the media to direct its lies, not at an adversary in another country far away, but rather at you and me here at home. Now, I have framed the collaboration of the media with the various deep state agencies against the ongoing wars that have taken place over the past couple of decades. I have done this to show their methods and their reasons. There is always an agenda, and you can be sure it's not to distribute the truth. I think their agenda by now is obvious to the awake and aware. Even now we are being led into war with Russia, with the mainstream media beating the drums of war yet again. Through a combination of the intelligence services of MI6 and the CIA, we are being led to believe that the Russian military is weak, demoralized, and dysfunctional. This is part of the larger narrative and has been wholeheartedly embraced by the senior military leadership of the United States and the UK in particular. We could probably throw in Australia, I'm sure, with varying degrees of other European powers who want to paint this disparaging picture of Russia. We see it all the time with our politicians. Russia did it! There is yet again an attempt to persuade Americans and Brits that what we are doing in Ukraine is not dangerous, when in fact it's extremely dangerous. But if you can persuade Americans and Europeans that Russia is really weak and incapable, here's the old playbook, then they will presumably have less objection to the injection of Western arms and intelligence into the conflict, not forgetting our money that our kids and grandkids will have to cough up in the future. But make no mistake about it, what we are doing is very dangerous. These people pushing war are unhinged. Also, we have the war at home, waged against us by the enemies of free speech, and who are surrounding us on all sides. In the UK, we are seeing this in a big way with new legislation just passed, the Online Safety Bill. It's basically an attack on platforms who enable voices that contradict the official narrative on a whole wide range of subjects, including but not limited to health. We saw what happened there with COVID, with war, mainstream media and legacy media narratives fed to them by the government and the corporate agenda of the state. Who knows where this could end?
What in the name of bloody hell?
It's enough to piss Victor Meldrew off big time. And can you blame him when legitimate voices who speak out against potential tyrannies are shut down? The government gets free rein to do what it likes without pushback from we, the people. But it need not be like this. They are there only because we put them there. There are alternatives. What's needed first of all is for independent journalism to get support from the bewildered herd, you and me. We need to say, enough of this. I'm going where I can get the truth. And that's usually from independent sources. Next, we need to tell those in Parliament to go screw themselves. But in order to really be effective, in this last strategy, we must organize. Just one or two voices won't do it. But an organized collaboration of pissed off citizens writing to their MPs or members of Congress can do a lot of good by promising a lot of damage for them at the next election. Imagine if their inboxes gets inundated with mail from angry grumpies like you and me. They don't care about us, but they do care about the power we wield. And their one hope is that we forget we have this power. But let's remember that power, and let's not let them get away with it. I'm the Grumpy Grandpa.
What in the name of bloody hell? I do not believe it. J.L. Dinkins, here pieces of distinction? Well, that just about takes a biscuit. I mean, dropping your wig in the bloody baking dough. I mean, he must have realised it had come off, for God's sake. Well, this is just about it. This is just about the whole bloody time. I mean, what am I going to find next? A false arm and the French stick, glass eyes staring up at me out of the coconut meringues. Absolutely bloody hideous. It's much more sensible wearing a loaf of bread on top of your head. How anyone could... Hello, yes, I'd like to speak to the manager, please, and quick about it. Meldrew. No, he doesn't, but he bloody well will shortly. I'll tell you exactly what the problem is. I have just bought a large wheel. When I found inside, only somebody's bloody today.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Grumpy Old Buggers channel, so I can get some peace and quiet.